This story comes from a woman I'll call Claire. She's in her mid-20s now, works in healthcare administration, lives in Tennessee. At the time this happened, she was 18 years old and in her first semester at a mid-sized university in the Southeast. She'd been assigned a roommate through the standard housing lottery, a woman she'll call Dana. They'd exchanged a few messages before move-in day. Dana seemed normal. Claire said she seemed more than normal, she seemed genuinely warm. Enthusiastic about the room layout, excited about classes, the kind of person who makes a good first impression and whose company you look forward to. Claire said move-in day was fine. Dana was already there when Claire arrived, had claimed the left side of the room, which was fine, was friendly and helpful, and introduced herself to Claire's parents in a way that Claire's mother described on the drive home as lovely. The first week was uneventful. Normal freshman week chaos, orientation events, getting lost finding classrooms, the specific overwhelming quality of the first week of college where everything is new simultaneously. Claire said Dana was around sometimes and not others, which was normal. They were both busy. They were both adjusting. The first thing Claire noticed was in week 2. She came back to the room late on a Wednesday night after a study group that had run past midnight. She unlocked the door quietly. Dana's side of the room was dark. She was presumably asleep. Claire moved carefully, keeping the overhead light off, using her phone screen to see. She set her bag down, got her things for the bathroom, and glanced toward Dana's bed. Dana was awake, lying on her back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, in the dark. Claire said she paused for a second and said, "Oh, sorry, are you awake?" She said it quietly, not wanting to fully disrupt if Dana was in that half-awake state where she'd fall back under easily. Dana didn't respond. Claire said she looked at her for another moment. Dana's eyes were open. She was looking at the ceiling. She hadn't moved at the sound of Claire's voice. Claire said she assumed she was asleep with her eyes open. It happens. She knew that. She'd heard of it. She went to the bathroom, came back, got into her own bed. She looked at Dana's side of the room once more before she closed her eyes. Dana was still on her back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Claire fell asleep. In the morning, Dana was her normal self. Up early, cheerful, asking about the study group, making plans for the weekend. Claire said the previous night's image was still in her head, but Dana was so normally Dana in the daylight that she filed it as the eyes open sleep thing and let it go. It happened again 4 days later. Claire came in late again. She was a night study person. The dorm was more productive after 10 p.m. when the social activity died down. Same scenario. Dana's side dark. Claire moving quietly. She glanced at Dana's bed. Same position. Same open eyes. Same complete stillness. This time Claire didn't speak. She watched for a moment. She was looking specifically for the chest movement of breathing because the stillness was complete enough that she felt the need to confirm it. She found it slight, slow, but there. Dana was breathing. Claire got into her own bed. She lay in the dark. Dana's side of the room was visible from Claire's pillow. She said she lay there for a long time watching the stillness of Dana's form across the room. She said she fell asleep eventually. She said what woke her up at 2:17 a.m. she still can't fully account for. Not a sound. She checked her phone for the time when she woke up and the room was silent. She was just suddenly awake, looking at the ceiling, and then turning her head toward Dana's side of the room by some instinct she can't explain. Dana was sitting up in bed. Upright, in the dark, facing Claire's side of the room. Claire said she lay completely still. She said her first thought was Dana was going to say something, was going to apologize for waking her or ask to turn a light on or say she wasn't feeling well. She waited for Dana to speak. Dana sat upright in the dark and faced Claire's side of the room and said nothing. Claire said she lay still for what she estimates was 3 minutes. Dana did not move, did not speak, sat upright in the dark facing Claire's bed with a stillness that was not the stillness of someone about to do something. It was the stillness of something that was simply present in the dark. Claire said she made a sound. Not a word, a small, involuntary throat-clearing sound, the kind you make when you want to signal wakefulness without fully committing to it. Dana's head moved, slowly, turned toward the window. And then she lay back down. In one slow motion, she lay back down and was horizontal again and still. Claire said she did not sleep again that night. She said she spent the next few days doing research and talking to her mother on the phone without telling her mother specifically what she was researching. She found information about a sleep behavior called non-REM parasomnia, essentially a state between sleep and wakefulness where a person can sit up, move, appear to be conscious, and have no memory of it in the morning. She showed the information to her mother without context. Her mother said that sounds like sleepwalking. Claire said sort of. Her mother said, "Is there a reason you're asking?" Claire said she'd read about it and found it interesting. She said she didn't tell Dana about it. She said she's thought about that since, whether she should have said something, whether the considerate thing was to bring it up, whether Dana knew. She said she decided not to say anything because something about the specific quality of Dana sitting upright in the dark facing her bed made her not want to draw attention to the fact that she'd been awake and watching. She said she doesn't know why that instinct was there. She said she trusts it in retrospect. The third incident happened 2 weeks later, and was the last one because it was the one that made Claire go to the housing office the next morning and request a room reassignment. She woke up at 3 a.m., no alarm. She opened her eyes and the room was dark and silent, and she turned her head toward Dana's side of the room as if she already knew what she was going to find. Dana was standing beside Claire's bed. Not at her own bed, not in the middle of the room. Standing directly beside Claire's bed, at the edge of it, close enough that Claire said if she had extended her hand it would have made contact. Standing in the dark beside Claire's sleeping form, looking down at her. Claire said she froze. She said every part of her body was telling her to be still, not a conscious decision. Her body made it before her mind could weigh in. She lay in the dark and didn't move, and Dana stood beside her bed and looked down at her in the dark. She said Dana's breathing was audible, slow and even. She said Dana's eyes were open. She could tell from the faint light that came under the door from the hallway, just enough to see the whites of them, open and looking down at the bed. She said she lay still for 4 minutes. She knows it was 4 minutes because she was watching the clock on her phone on the nightstand, and she tracked it. 4 minutes of Dana standing beside her bed looking down at her in the dark. Then Dana turned and walked back to her own bed and lay down. Claire went to the housing office when it opened at 8 a.m. She said she told them she and her roommate had a personality conflict and she needed to be moved. She said she used those words specifically, personality conflict, because she didn't know how to say my roommate stands beside my bed and looks at me while I'm sleeping without it sounding like something they would respond to with counseling referrals rather than room reassignments. She got a new room 2 weeks later in a different hall. She saw Dana around campus occasionally for the rest of the year. Dana was always pleasant when they crossed paths. Smiled, said hi, asked how the new room was going. Normal Dana, daylight Dana, the warm, enthusiastic version who had made a good impression on Claire's mother on move-in day. Claire said she never told Dana what she'd seen. She said she thought about it many times and never did it. She said the thing she's turned over the most is the question of whether Dana knew. Whether the episodes were parasomnia, genuine sleep behavior with no conscious component, or whether there was some portion of Dana that was aware of what she was doing in those dark hours. She said she can't answer that, and she's not sure she wants to. She said she's glad she got the room reassignment when she did. She said she's never been able to sleep with anyone in the same room as her since, without keeping the light on. She said she knows how that sounds. She said she doesn't care. Story 2, The Floor. This story comes from a man I'll call Ethan. He's in his late 20s now, lives in Colorado, works in software. At the time this happened, he was 19 and living in the dorms at a large state university in the Midwest. He was on the 4th floor of a residence hall, a traditional long corridor layout, about 30 rooms on each side of a central hallway, shared bathrooms at each end. He said it was a standard dorm on a standard campus, and he'd spent most of his first semester not thinking about it at all. He said the fourth floor had a reputation that he didn't know about until the second semester. He found out about the reputation because of his neighbor. His neighbor in the room directly next door was a junior, an upperclassman who'd specifically requested fourth-floor housing, which Ethan thought was unusual when he learned it. Upperclassmen generally moved off campus or into the upper-tier dorms. Choosing to stay in a freshman residence hall for your third year required a specific reason. He asked his neighbor about it once, casually, and his neighbor, he calls him Rob, said something that Ethan said he filed away, and then spent a long time wishing he hadn't. Rob said he liked keeping an eye on things. Ethan said he asked what that meant. Rob said the fourth floor had a history. Ethan said what kind of history. Rob said the kind that buildings don't put in the brochure. He said it as a joke. He was smiling when he said it. Ethan laughed and let it go because that was the social thing to do. He stopped letting it go in February. It started with the sounds. He was studying late in his room, 1 a.m., the floor quiet, most of the hall asleep. He was at his desk with headphones on one ear when he heard something from the hallway. He said he pulled the headphone off and listened. Footsteps in the corridor. Slow, coming from the direction of the north bathroom, moving toward the south end of the hall. He said footsteps in a dorm hallway at 1 a.m. were not remotely unusual. People kept late hours. People went to the bathroom. People came home from wherever. He registered the sound and didn't think about it. The footsteps stopped outside his door. He said he looked at the door. The gap under his door showed the hallway light. There was always a low light in the corridor overnight, not full brightness, but enough to see by. He said the gap under the door went dark. Not all at once. It went dark in the specific way it goes dark when someone is standing in front of it. A pair of feet blocking the light from under the door. He said he waited for a knock. Nothing came. He said he called out, "Yeah," in the way you call out when someone is at your door and hasn't knocked yet. Nothing. He said he waited another minute. The gap under the door stayed dark. Someone was still standing there. He got up from his desk and went to the door and looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty. He said he stood at the door and looked through the peephole for a solid 30 seconds. Empty corridor. The overhead light illuminating the linoleum floor and the blank doors on both sides, and nothing else. He looked left and right as far as the peephole's range allowed. Nobody. He opened the door. The corridor was empty in both directions. He looked toward both bathrooms. Both bathroom doors were closed. He stood in the doorframe and listened. Silence. He went back inside. He went back to his desk. He pulled his headphone back on. He said it happened again 11 days later. Same time approximately. Footsteps from the north end, stopping outside his door, gap going dark. This time he went straight to the door without calling out. Looked through the peephole before whoever it was had time to move. Corridor empty. He opened the door, empty. He walked to Rob's door and knocked. Rob answered in the way of someone who was already awake at 1 a.m. and not surprised to be knocked on. Ethan described what had just happened. Rob listened without the expression of someone hearing something surprising. Rob asked him if he wanted to know about the fourth floor. Ethan said yes. Rob said the fourth floor of that building had a documented history of what the university housing office called maintenance complaints. Their term, Rob said, for anything a resident reported that facilities couldn't explain. Over the past 6 years, there had been 14 formal maintenance complaints from fourth-floor residents involving sounds in the corridor at night, the sensation of someone outside their door, and in 2 cases, something Rob described with careful vagueness as visual disturbances in the hallway. Rob said he'd looked into the history of the building, specifically because a friend of his had lived on the 4th floor 2 years earlier and had left mid-semester for reasons he'd never fully explained. Ethan asked Rob what he thought was causing it. Rob said he didn't know. He said the building was old, constructed in the 1950s, renovated multiple times, but the bones of it were original. He said old buildings had histories, and the histories weren't always accessible or comfortable. He said he'd been on the floor for a year and a half specifically because he wanted to understand what was happening there, and he said he hadn't fully understood it yet. Ethan asked Rob if he'd experienced the footsteps and the door. Rob said yes. He said the footsteps stopped at his door too. He said it stopped at every door on the north side of the corridor. He said it moved through sequentially. Ethan said, "What do you mean sequentially?" Rob said he'd timed it. Over multiple incidents, tracking the footsteps from where they began to where they ended, they moved consistently from the north bathroom end of the corridor southward, stopping at each door on the north side for approximately the same amount of time before continuing, like something making rounds. He said it had never gone past the door at the midpoint of the corridor. He said he didn't know why it stopped at the midpoint. He said he'd been trying to figure that out for a year and a half. Ethan said he spent the rest of the semester with a specific relationship to his door. He said he never fully stopped listening for the footsteps. He said they happened twice more after his conversation with Rob, both times following the same pattern, the corridor empty when he looked, the gap under the door going dark and then light again. He said the last time it happened was in April, 2 weeks before the end of the semester. He looked through the peephole as he always did, and the corridor was empty as it always was. But this time when he opened his door, he found something he hadn't found before. On the floor directly outside his door, pressed flat against the linoleum as if it had been there for a while, was a photograph. He picked it up, black and white, old enough that the paper had a specific weight and yellowing that modern photo paper doesn't have. It showed a corridor, a long hallway with doors on both sides, a low overhead light, the linoleum floor. He said he recognized it immediately. It was the 4th floor corridor, the same hallway, the same layout, same doors. He said he looked at the photograph for a long time. He said there was something in the corridor in the photograph. At the far end, at the north bathroom end, barely visible at the limit of the hallway light's reach. A shape. He said he couldn't make out details. The photograph's resolution at that distance was poor, and it was black and white, and the shape was at the edge of the light. But something was at the north end of the corridor in the photograph, and something about the shape of it, the proportion of it, the way it stood, made him put the photograph face down on his desk. He knocked on Rob's door and showed him. Rob looked at the photograph for a long time. Then Rob asked Ethan where he'd found it. Ethan said outside his door, just now. Rob said he'd never seen the photograph before. Ethan asked if he wanted to keep it. Rob said no. Ethan threw it away that night. He said he put it in the trash in the south bathroom and walked back to his room and didn't go back for it. He transferred to off-campus, housing the following fall. He said he asked Rob, before he left, if Rob had ever figured out why it stopped at the midpoint of the corridor. Rob said not yet. Ethan said he never heard from Rob again after that semester. He looked him up once, a year later, and found that Rob had left the university mid-year. He found no further information. He said he still thinks about the photograph sometimes. The corridor he recognized, the shape at the north end, the way Rob had looked at it for a long time and then said he'd never seen it before. He said he thinks about the sequential stops at every door on the north side. He said he thinks about what it was looking for. He said he hopes it didn't find it. Story 3, the bathroom. This is the last story and the one that took the longest to read through because of how methodically the person who sent it, I'll call her Sophie, documented what happened. Sophie is in her mid-20s, lives in New York now, was studying journalism at a university in the Northeast when this happened. She said her journalism instincts kicked in early, and she started writing things down from the second week, which means her account has dates and times and specific details that most stories I receive don't have. She said she wishes she hadn't needed to document any of it. Sophie lived in a suite-style dorm, 4 single bedrooms sharing a common room and a private bathroom. Her 3 suite mates were women she'd been randomly assigned. She'll call them Becca, Jess, and Anna. She said they were a good group, compatible, respectful of each other's space, the kind of sweet situation that could easily go wrong and didn't. She felt fortunate. The bathroom was a standard dorm bathroom. Shower, toilet, sink, the utilitarian tile and fluorescent lighting of institutional design. Shared equally among the 4 of them. Nothing remarkable about it. Sophie said she was the first one in the suite to notice something wrong with the bathroom. She said she noticed it in week 3 and said nothing about it for 10 days because she was trying to determine whether she was the only one experiencing it before she raised it, and potentially made everyone else anxious about something that might be only in her head. What she noticed was this. She was showering one evening, 9 p.m., the suite common room audible through the bathroom door, Becca watching something on her laptop, normal background noise. She was in the shower when the bathroom light went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. Off, instant and total. She was standing in a shower stall in complete darkness. She said she called out. She said the light just went out. Can someone flip it? She heard Becca's voice from the common room saying something. She couldn't make it out clearly through the door. She said the light didn't come back on. She said she was standing in the shower in the dark, and she reached for where the shower curtain was and pushed it open and stepped out of the stall into the bathroom, also dark. She felt her way to the light switch by the door and flipped it. Nothing. She flipped it several times. The light stayed off. She said she opened the bathroom door. Light from the common room came in, and Becca was on the couch looking at her and said she thought she heard something and was just about to check. Becca flipped the light switch from the common room side. The bathroom flooded with light. Sophie said she stood in the door frame dripping and looked at the lit bathroom. The switch had worked from outside. It hadn't worked from inside. She noted it in her phone journal that night. Date, time, what happened, what she'd tried. It happened again, 6 days later. Different time, Leuven, p.m. this time, Jess in the shower, Sophie already in bed when she heard Jess call out from the bathroom. She got up and went to the common room. The bathroom light was off. She flipped the switch from the common room side. Light came on. Jess came out looking shaken. Sophie said she asked Jess if the switch hadn't worked from inside. Jess said no. She'd tried it and nothing happened. Sophie noted it. She compared her 2 notes. Same situation. Light going out in the middle of someone showering. Switch non-functional from inside, functional from outside. She said she told her RA about what she described as a recurring electrical issue with the bathroom light. The RA sent a maintenance request. A facilities person came out 3 days later, checked the switch and the wiring, said everything appeared functional and correctly wired, found no fault. Sophie noted that too. The 3rd incident happened 2 weeks later. Honor in the shower at 7 a.m., Sophie and Buka both up and in the common room. Light went out. Anna called out. Sophie flipped the switch from outside. Light came on. 3 incidents, 3 different people. Same pattern. Switch dead from inside, functional from outside, facilities finding nothing wrong. Sophie said she sat with her notes and thought about what would produce that specific pattern if it wasn't an electrical fault. She said her journalism brain was working the problem. What's the mechanism? What would cause a switch to work from one side and not the other, repeatedly and inconsistently, and only during use by a person alone in the bathroom? She said she came up with one answer that wasn't electrical. Someone was turning the light off from outside. She sat with that for a day before she did anything with it. She checked the common room side of the bathroom door. There was a light switch on the wall to the right of the bathroom door, the one they'd been using to restore light from outside. She looked at it carefully. She looked at its positioning relative to the bathroom door. She looked at the gap between the door and the frame. She said the gap was wider than it should be. The door was slightly warped, old building. The door had swollen and contracted through seasons and didn't fit its frame perfectly. There was a gap along the hinge side of maybe half an inch. She said someone standing at the bathroom door with the door closed could reach 2 fingers through that gap and apply lateral pressure to the switch on the other side. She said she tried it herself. She stood at the bathroom door with it closed and put 2 fingers through the gap and felt the switch on the other side, and she pushed it. The bathroom light went out. She pushed it again. It came back on. She stood in the common room and looked at what she'd just discovered and thought about it for a long time. She knocked on all 3 suite mates' doors and gathered them in the common room and showed them. All 4 of them stood there and looked at the gap and the switch placement, and the mechanism was clear and simple and unmistakable, and none of them said anything for a moment. Then Buka said who did it. Sophie said she didn't know. There were 4 people with access to the suite, the 4 of them, plus their raw and facilities staff who'd been in once, and anyone who had accessed the suite through the front door, which required a key card but whose key card log they didn't have access to. Sophie went to her raw that day and presented her notes. Dates, times, incidents, the gap in the door, the mechanism. The raw's response, Sophie documented this too, was initially to suggest it could still be an electrical coincidence. Sophie showed her the gap demonstration. The raw went quiet. The raw filed a report with housing. The housing office reviewed the key card access logs for the suite. They found 3 entries in the log during times when none of the 4 suite mates had been present in the building, confirmed by their class schedules and dining card usage. 3 entries. The dates corresponded to 2 of the 3 light incidents and 1 additional date. The entries were made with a master key card, a facilities master. The facilities employee who had come to check the electrical issue was questioned. Sophie was not privy to the details of that conversation. She was told by the housing office that the matter was being handled internally and that they were taking it seriously. She and her suite mates were moved to a different suite in a different building within 72 hours. She said she was told, obliquely and without specifics, that the employee no longer worked for the university. She said she was not told anything else. She said she's thought about what the intention was, what the purpose of the darkness was, whether it was something that had escalated or something that was a first step. She said she doesn't know, and she said she's chosen not to pursue that line of thinking too deeply because the answer she arrives at when she does pursue, it is not one she wants to sit with. She said the journalism instinct, the documentation, the dates, the times, the mechanism, is the thing that made it actionable. She said if she hadn't written it down from the second incident, she would have had nothing concrete to bring to her raw. She said the concrete thing is what got them moved. The concrete thing is what got the logs pulled. She said she thinks about the other 3 incidents in the log, the 2 that corresponded to incidents she documented, and the 3rd one, the date that didn't correspond to any light incident she'd recorded. She said she doesn't know what happened on that 3rd date. She said none of her suite mates reported anything. She said whatever happened on that date either wasn't noticed or wasn't reported. She said she hopes it wasn't noticed. She said write things down. She said document it even when you're not sure it means anything. She said the documentation is what makes you credible, and credibility is what gets things done. She said she's a journalist now. She said she thinks the dorm might be part of why.